There's a pervasive and popular thought that power and money corrupts those who touch it, that every person who comes into some form of power over another person is destined to be destroyed by the allure of that power and use it selfishly. But I don't think that that is true. In my opinion, the statement that power doesn't corrupt, it simply reveals, is much more accurate. Through doing this job for a number of years, researching cases of the worst kinds of people, I have witnessed that there are good people who have power. They will stand up for what is right and make choices that go against the grain, and work tirelessly to expose those around them harming others. When they came into money or power, they didn't use it to exploit people around them, or even live in an excessive way. They are the same person morally as they were before, except maybe they are less stressed about paying their bills. Take, for example, the case of G.I. Joe Glenowitz, where a crooked cop faked his own murder because a city official was about to find out about his years of theft, sexual abuse, and various other misdeeds. He offered her bribes, threats, and even considered killing her to get her off of his trail, but she persisted. She didn't even know that the standard audit that she'd been hired to do would uncover his escapades, but when it became obvious that he was hiding something, she refused to let up. She had power over Joe, power over the entire police department, so much so that in the text messages to his wife and son about her, he claimed that she was evil and trying to destroy his life, but she never wielded that power for her benefit. She didn't tell the officers that they needed to abide by her rules. She didn't use her newfound influence to get away with crimes or expunge her record. She was just doing her job. There are great people who have power and genuinely try to make the world a better place with it, and we could spend days listing them out. But I have an even bigger issue with the original phrase. The saying seems a bit too permissive towards the corrupted individuals, as if they are not the ones fully responsible for their actions, that their lives were not a series of events and choices that they willingly made in order to get that power, with the purpose of using it to hurt others. These people seek out money, celebrity, and fame with the knowledge that those things will allow them into the lives of other people, and enable them to become untouchable in the eyes of the public. None of the famous, wealthy, powerful people we've discussed have hurt others by accident. They'll set up their lives in a manner that allows for them to be beyond reproach, making sure that everyone who bears witness to their crimes is either involved, blackmailing them with said involvement, or so mentally destroyed by what they've seen so they will never come forward, and they'll be written off by the general public. Like in the case of Bill Cosby, he cultivated the image of a nice, older man, one who desperately loved his wife, and wore giant sweaters, and was so objectively, morally good that the most scandalous thing that he'd ever done or said in his career, prior to the accusations, is denounce comedians who swear. Despite decades of accusations and Cosby's own confession, there are still people who believe that he is innocent, who love the idea that he sold them so much that they refuse to believe he is capable of harming them. To this day, they denounce and disparage those he hurt and attack anyone who talks about the case. They also ignore his own statements where he admits to his crimes because it doesn't fit their idea of him. The powerful men and women we have covered on this channel were not corrupted by power. They sought out power with the plans to use it to harm those around them. And today's case is no different. In fact, it might be one of the worst examples of it. Welcome back to another episode of Dreading, or if this is your first time here, welcome. Today we are going to be examining the case of R. Kelly, the famed music star who was so brazen with his crimes that he sang about the horrible abuses he imposed on the women and children in his life. This video has been in the works for years now, with me having to stop for considerable lengths of time due to the intense nature of the crimes. We also felt it necessary to cover these cases with the respect and care that they deserve, so the script that I'm reading from today has been looked over, edited, and rewritten countless times. So I hope this case is done to your liking. If you have any comments or criticisms that you would like to share with us, feel free to email me at dreading.official@gmail.com, or let me know in the comments down below. This video is also part of our Halloween series, where we upload every day leading up to Halloween. This series is meant to be a thank you for all the support and kindness you've shared with us over the years, with us covering some of the most requested cases you've submitted to the channel. If there is another case you would like to see or a topic you would like more attention brought to, you can of course again email me at dreading.official@gmail.com. I'm constantly going through the emails and adding topics to the list to research, and it's the best way to make sure that I see your suggestions. I also want to mention that we're planning on covering the developing case of Sean P. Diddy Combs. We've begun multiple scripts, but I had to put them aside, as there's still constant updates coming out. At a certain point, we were getting ready to upload a video on the subject to our Patreon supporters, but a new element of the case broke, immediately rendering our coverage outdated and moot. But rest assured, we are working on it. Before we begin, it should also be stated that we are going over the details of the case, which includes child exploitation, trafficking, and general abuse. We do not censor any of the details herein, or use any language to try and get around the YouTube algorithm, as we feel that cheapens the subject matter. So if you are at all sensitive to this information, please click off of the video. Your well-being is of course more important than any watch time metric. But this warning is only as effective as you allow it to be, so please look after yourself. Books like Soulless, The Case Against R. Kelly, and the Surviving R. Kelly documentary were used heavily in the creation of this video. So, with all of that said, let us begin. R. Kelly was born Robert Sylvester Kelly on the south side of Chicago. He was the third child of single mother Joanne Kelly, with 2 older sisters and a brother. Joanne would later get married when Kelly was around 5 years old, and have another brother and sister, and was raised surrounded by family. His mother moved the family in with his grandmother in the Ida B. Wells Project in Chicago, and Robert would state that there were always people, namely women, coming and going from the home. His mother was deeply religious, and is often cited as being a devout Baptist, but due to the family's low finances, was not as present as she might have hoped to be. When his mother and grandmother were out of the home, Robert would describe how the other women living with them would act differently. At around 8 years old, Kelly took notice of how the older women in the home would act promiscuously, inviting men over, dressing differently, and engaging in adult behavior around him. In his autobiography, Solar Coaster, which came out in 2012, Kelly's ghostwriter would say, quote, "Cousins, aunties, friends of my aunties, all older women. When my mother wasn't around, the women ran a little freer. As I crept up in age, I found myself more curious and sometimes aroused, and I was ashamed of being aroused." Kelly would begin to be sexually abused and exploited in his own home by many of the women living there. This exploitation began when a woman living in the house brought a man over to have sex, and found the 8-year-old watching. After being caught, she would instruct Robert to take photos of her having sex with the man on another occasion. She gave him a Polaroid camera, which he stated he was fascinated by, and he completed the task at hand. But that would be far from the only instance of abuse. That same year, his older sister Teresa would begin sexually abusing Robert, ordering him to keep the abuse a secret. When Kelly would discuss the abuse, he would keep the name of his abuser private, only revealing in a 2022 court filing that it was his older sister who sexually abused him. However, in 2019, his brother Kerry would publicly accuse Teresa of molesting both Robert and himself when she was 16, and they would be between the ages of 6 and 10. He would allege that she would send their older brother outside to play and force either of the brothers to act out her sexual desires. Before we go any further, it's important to note that the abuses inflicted on Robert do not in any way justify or excuse what he would go on to do to others. 2 things can be true at once. Robert should not have been sexually exploited in his youth, and he shouldn't have gone on to sexually exploit others. Many people seem to believe that when we talk about a predator's background, and it involves something horrific like this, that we are excusing or justifying what they did, but that is far from the case. Exploring why something happened instead of simply telling you that it did happen is the purpose of this channel. Many experts who study abuse victims who later go on to abuse others hypothesize that in some cases, abuse victims might mistake their feelings about what they've gone through as being passion or love, especially if the abuser was someone that they otherwise had fond feelings for, and the abuse happened in their youth. They might have a hard time understanding that what they went through was wrong, and that the other party was at fault. Because of that, they might see what they are doing as being normal. Research into this subject is limited and not at all concrete. But to be clear, no victim of abuse is doomed by their circumstances to victimize others. Links will be left in the description box down below to papers on the subject, as well as a charity organization that helps victims of child sex abuse. While this was going on, Robert had begun to isolate himself from other children his age. He had a hard time fitting in with his peers, due in part to his learning disability. Reading and writing was harder for the young boy, as he would later be diagnosed with dyslexia, and other children in the area often singled him out because of it. All they knew was that Robert couldn't do something that they could, and they routinely mocked him for his failures. He would go on to say that when he tried to read texts, he would often hear what he called scrambled music. His focus would be pulled elsewhere, and would become distracted with the sounds his mind was inventing. It's possible that he was also dealing with some form of synesthesia, where the brain routes sensory information through multiple unrelated senses, causing the person to experience more than one sense simultaneously. Although, that's just what we've gleaned from listening to him talk about his relationship to music and sound. Robert's younger brother would describe him during this time as being outstandingly shy and reserved, choosing to stay inside most days instead of hanging out with the other kids. He was isolated both in his home and at school, and he struggled to nurture any relationship because of it. However, Robert would describe this time a bit differently. Although he would say that he didn't get along with many of his classmates in his book, he would also do an interview with GQ in 2016, where he boasted about being the only one of his friends to be able to put his hands on the Sears Tower. As he told it, all the kids in his neighborhood were terrified of the structure, as during its construction, they felt like if they touched it, it would fall over and crush them to death. Groups of children would take turns daring each other to walk over to the structure and touch it, but no one would do it, save for him. As he remembered it, he went with a group of friends to see the structure, and would be the only kid brave enough to approach the building. As he pressed his hands on the tower, he informed it that he would be coming for it, as he had big things planned in his life. He said, quote, "In my life, I wanted to feel tall. I wanted to be somebody. I wanted to be as tall as the Sears Tower. I wanted to be on top of the Sears Tower. I wanted to be as strong as the Sears Tower feels. When my mom would be on the freeway, I would always look at the Sears Tower as, that's where I want to go, that's where I want to be." How true the story is remains to be seen, as it goes against how he had described himself prior, and how his friends and family at the time spoke about him. But there was one place where Robert seemed to excel, and that was music. As we mentioned, Robert saw music all around him, literally. He would see text written out and a melody would come to him, begging him to bring it to fruition. Joanne would take her children to church every Sunday and sing around the family home often, and Robert would always join in, wowing the rest of his family with his abilities. That same year, Robert would go through his first profound loss. Though Robert was unpopular with his peers, he had been able to make one friend, a young girl named Lulu. Whenever Robert would speak about Lulu, he would gush that she was his first love, and say that they repeatedly pledged their devotion to each other. They would talk about how they planned to spend their lives together in the grandiose fashion that children often did, and spend most of their time talking and holding hands. However, that future would never come to be. One day while playing in a creek, Robert and Lulu got into a fight with a couple of older kids about who could play in a certain area. The argument was stupid and childish, the way all fights between kids usually are. But in the scuffle, Lulu would be pushed into the water. The small girl was quickly swept downstream and drowned in front of Robert, which impacted him greatly. Robert would state repeatedly that she was his first love and artistic muse. Following the death of Lulu, Robert's sexual abuse would continue, both at the hands of his sister as well as an unidentified male family friend. Studies have also shown, unfortunately, that is not uncommon either. People who have been abused sexually or otherwise often become targets for other abusers. In fact, 6 years ago, a convicted predator named Jack Ryan did an interview where he openly discussed how he chose children to prey on, and this is what he said.
How did you get them alone?
Grooming. I would check out their family situation. I would check out their clothing to see how well they were, financially. I would check out their social interaction with other kids. When we were on the ballparks or on the gym floor, I would make sure which ones I wanted to molest. I would give them special attention, congratulate them, talk to them when I know that I would never be allowed to talk to anybody else. Aside from everybody, I would give them the attention that an official is not supposed to give anybody. And it made them feel like, wow, he's paying me attention. It is a direct form of grooming.
Were there certain characteristics that you looked for in children before molesting them?
In children, yes, but more I also looked at their families. If I thought the father was a threat, I would not approach the child. If I thought that the child had friends that he would tell, I would not approach him. If I thought the child had friends that were in the same capacity he was, I would approach him. For the simple fact that if I could molest him, I could lure him into believing, grooming him into believing that he would enjoy it. And therefore, I could manipulate him into having his other friends come and be molested by me as well.
So perhaps a child that doesn't really have a whole lot of friends, maybe not really a strong family, things like that.
Yes, no spiritual values, weak in education, needs help in many ways, even from split parenting. has a mother who may be having problems with the family, well, here comes superhero in to help out, wow, well, thank you very much. No problem. You ever need me to take him away for the night so you can have a night out? No problem. It works.
Robert's childhood unfortunately allowed predators to see him as an easier target, through no fault of his own. Robert would go on to experience even more hardship. Although the details of what exactly occurred in this instance are hazy, when he was 13 he would allege that he was shot in the shoulder by a group of older boys who were attempting to steal his bike. However, close family and friends would state that the gunshot had been self-inflicted as Robert was incredibly depressed. He had suffered through years of sexual abuse at this point by multiple different people. He was heavily bullied, and he had witnessed death firsthand. Both instances are plausible. It just depends on whether or not you trust Robert's assessment of his own life or not. However, shortly after he was shot, his life would seemingly begin to turn around in a way that he hadn't expected. His music teacher saw potential in the boy and repeatedly encouraged him to pursue the arts. Kelly was on the basketball team and planned to pursue the sport in hopes of making more friends, but his choir teacher, Lena McClin, would go out of her way to sabotage the boy's sports prospects so he could pursue music more actively. This act of sabotage upset Kelly deeply, but the teacher said she knew immediately that he had potential to be a star. At her insistence, Robert would perform in his school's talent show, where he would sing Stevie Wonder's Ribbon in the Sky. The idea of performing in front of his peers scared the boy tremendously, as these were the people who made his life hell up until this point. Whenever he had been asked to speak in his class prior, he had always been ridiculed, and he thought that when he stood in the spotlight, it would be more of the same. Nervous, he wore a pair of sunglasses, hoping to block out the sight of his tormentors when he was on stage, and when he was called to take the stage, he had to be physically dragged to his mark. But the moment the music started, everyone was transfixed. McClin would record the performance, and upon playing it for a reporter with the LA Times, remarked on how incredible Kelly was, even at that age. This instance seemed to change who Robert was as a person. While he was still incredibly shy and nervous around others, he gained confidence in his singing ability, and he began to dream about what his life could be like if he actively pursued a future in music. Kelly realized that while he couldn't read or write very well, he had a natural aptitude for music, being able to play music by ear. He was able to get himself a keyboard, which he used to create the songs he heard in his head for years at that point. Academics no longer appealed to him, as he felt like he couldn't keep up with his classmates in the first place, but when he sang, he felt untouchable. In his senior year of high school, he would drop out and begin busking in the Chicago area. Through his pursuit of music, he would meet 3 other musically gifted men, Mark McWilliams, Sean Brooks, and Vince Walker. The men would talk about their dreams, how they hoped to get noticed by a label executive and be stars. They agreed that they would probably be more successful if they teamed up and performed as a group. They gave themselves the name MGM, standing for Musically Gifted Men. However, Robert was adamant that if they were to work together, he was going to be the front man, placing his name in front of the others whenever he could. After less than a year of performing together, the group was offered a contract from an independent label, but it was far and away from the big break they had hoped for. Robert would write the music for the group, and under this label would release one song, titled Why You Wanna Play Me, that did see some success.
Something when I've already seen it for myself. Now look, here's the question. Do I look like a donut? Well, why do you want to glaze me? No, I don't want to hear it. No, you listen to this.
After that same year, an American-based talent contest had come to their area, titled Big Break. The show was not dissimilar to modern competition talent shows that are a dime a dozen, where the audience would vote for which act they liked the best. Seeing a golden opportunity, Robert would sign the group up under the name R. Kelly and MGM, and the group would get to work putting together spectacular performances.
Our last band takes great pride in their positive and energetic performances. They've been burning up their own hometown with award-winning shows, and they're determined to show you why Chicago's going crazy for them. Please welcome R. Kelly and MGM.
MGM in the house.
Come on, everybody, get your hands in the air. Clap it, everybody.
They would go on to win the first and only season of the competition, becoming audience favorites. Their performances can still be found on YouTube, which I will leave linked below. However, despite winning $100,000 and gaining a fair bit of public name recognition, they would break up shortly thereafter. In the reporting around the split, it seemed that Robert was incredibly controlling and egotistical regarding his contributions to the band. When they settled on the name MGM, that was supposed to be a moniker for the entire group. But Robert always wanted to be center stage. It was vitally important to him to have some amount of name recognition, to place himself before everyone else, and his ego only got worse with time. But the win had put Robert on many labels' radar, and he would quickly form a new group, Public Announcement, and they would be signed to Jive Records. Robert would write and produce the group's first record, Born in the 90s, which saw moderate success. But once again, Robert's ego got in the way of the group's dynamic. Working with other people and collaborating at all bothered Robert. He believed that he knew best, and whenever he would get his way, he was often successful. Reportedly, when the other members or producers would try and give their input, even in a well-tempered, polite manner, Robert would lash out at them, screaming until he ultimately got his way. This was Robert's first taste of success, and the first time that people around him began to really treat him as if he were something special, someone to be idolized and revered, and he would immediately use his influence to prey on others the way he had been preyed on as a child. On the outside, Robert maintained a somewhat humble persona. He never moved out of Chicago, even with all of his success, and he was routinely seen playing basketball with his old friends and hanging out around his old haunts, like his former high school. His teacher would show him off to the students, telling them if they worked hard and followed their dreams, they too could be successful, just like Robert, despite the fact that he hadn't been successful in school and had dropped out. He was a hometown hero, and he always seemed to have time to talk to disadvantaged teens in the area, especially if they were girls between the ages of 14 and 16. He was so accessible to the public that whenever he would be seen driving around, people would stop him in the hopes of talking to the star, and whenever a young girl approached, he would stop whatever he was doing to talk to them for long stretches of time. And that was true of Tiffany Hawkins. Tiffany's life mirrored Robert's in various ways. She grew up close to where he had. She was abused by people inside of her home, and though she was shy, she used singing as a way to express herself. She even went to the same high school as Robert and was mentored by Lena McLin. One day when Tiffany was a sophomore in high school, she was waiting for the bus with her friend when they saw Kelly's car and quickly ran to try and speak to the singer. He talked to the young girls for a bit, telling them he appreciated their love and support, and gave Tiffany, a 15-year-old, his home address, telling her that she could come over to his house and bring some of her friends. Tiffany was starstruck. This was a person that had made it in the field she wanted to pursue, a hometown hero, someone who she saw herself in. He was cool, suave, and seemed genuinely interested in helping her. Without a second thought, she called some of her friends, and together they went to the 25-year-old's home. It was nicer than any place she had ever been to in her short life, but notably, Kelly seemed interested in her. She told him that she wanted to be a singer, not unlike him, and when he asked her to sing something for him, he made a show out of literally falling out of his chair when she hit a high note. Again, this was someone she idolized, who was telling her that she was talented and seeming genuinely invested in her abilities. She felt untouchable. With his mentorship, she thought she could escape her abusive home life and make a name for herself. But as the night continued on, Kelly and a group of her friends seemed to disappear, going to his bedroom and never leaving. Eventually, Tiffany found herself compelled to investigate where the party had gone, and that's when she witnessed the 24-year-old having sex with a group of her friends. These girls were all between the ages of 14 and 16. Tiffany felt uncomfortable, but not because she recognized that a crime was being committed in front of her. She wasn't fully aware of that fact, and would go on to say, quote, "This was a star, so for me, I thought maybe this was different. Maybe this was just how it goes." The 15-year-old didn't join in, and after Kelly was done, he would go on to talk to her about her star potential and insist that she come over again, bringing more of her young friends with her. Tiffany felt special, seen, and at 15, the gravity of what he was asking her to do hadn't hit her. Kelly provided her one-on-one attention, and they developed a sibling-like relationship. She could call him for anything, and he would give her life advice. If she was struggling at home, or her stepfather had hurt her, he would give her a place to stay free of charge, and all she had to do was keep providing him with new girls every so often. She introduced him to at least 6 of her friends, all between the ages of 14 and 15, and Kelly began to call her Cable Girl, because she always had the hookup. But as time would go on, Kelly would begin to prey on Hawkins herself. It started when he would ask her to join in while having sex with some of her friends. When she relented, he began to focus on her fully and began to isolate her completely. He would tell her that she was talented, smart, and provided her with professional opportunities, while also creating such a toxic environment that she had no one else to rely on, save for him. Like with most predators, the shift was slow and deliberate. Robert would praise her and then ask her for small things. He began to control how she dressed and acted, saying that he didn't want men looking at her, that if she was going to be a star, she needed to follow his direction. But after months of deliberate action, she was no longer being treated like a person, as Robert was in control of every aspect of her life. While this was going on, Public Announcement was able to complete one tour and album cycle before Robert left the band, determined to pursue music as a solo act, believing the groups he had been in were just holding him back, and with his first album, he would be proven right. 12 Play would be a smash success for the artist, topping the R&B charts for 9 weeks straight and receiving mainstream success. The title 12 Play, which is a play on the term foreplay, referenced how Robert was so great in bed apparently that foreplay wasn't enough, because 12 would be 8 better, and I can't even tell you about 16 or 20 play, so don't even ask. The entire album was extremely sexual, with songs like Bump and Grind, Your Body's Callin', and Sex Me, Part 1 and 2, gaining wide acclaim. But Kelly wasn't just writing and performing these songs, he was also producing, which gave him an edge on the other acts in the industry. He had the ability to make full completed work, where some acts could only sing or dance. Labels quickly picked up on this fact and began to use him as much as possible. Why would they pay multiple audio engineers, songwriters, and singers and the like, when you could pay one man who could reliably produce hits? As his success continued to grow, Kelly began to get a bit more brazen with his grooming. He was regularly seen at his old high school, so much so that the police would record that he was a fixture in the area. Though any random adult man spending as much time at a high school would be cause for concern, they too gave the singer a pass. He was a celebrity. He could sleep with anyone he wanted, models, celebrities, and the like. Why would R. Kelly be interested in teenage girls? In their minds, he was just monitoring the youth, more specifically, young girls, not because he was sexually attracted to them, but because he saw potential in them. But when he wasn't at the high school, he would go to the nearest McDonald's, knowing it was where all the kids would migrate to after class. He would often enter the fast food establishment with his posse, sitting down at the nicest booth and sending members of his entourage to approach young girls. They would tell the girls that R. Kelly was interested in them, that they had an interesting look, and he wanted to talk to them. Girls who were approached this way often felt chosen, like they were being offered an opportunity to leave their old life behind, and would do anything the singer asked. He would pick 1 or 2 girls up this way, then bring them to his studio. Because he could create full hit records, the record company often gave him anything he wanted, meaning that everyone there would have to answer to him and to him alone. He'd usually give these girls a tour of the record studio, then bring them into the booth, where he would sexually assault them with the studio full of employees sitting behind the glass. Those who knew about this sexual assault were either directly on his payroll, meaning they financially benefited from his continued freedom, or they simply didn't care, choosing to look the other way because they were profiting. At this point, R. Kelly was a business that benefited more than just one man. People relied on him to make an income, to continue their own careers, and even if they didn't like what they were witnessing, if they spoke out, they would be the ones blacklisted. If Robert's predation was discovered, it would affect everyone around him, and so everyone around him would help him cover up his crimes, for their own selfish reasons. His songs were making them millions of dollars after all, and he was producing some of the top acts in the industry, and then he would be introduced to Aaliyah. Aaliyah Dana Houghton was destined to be a singer, according to all of those who knew her. She had an indescribable talent that wowed those around her, and when she was just 10 years old, she would perform on Star Search. Though she wouldn't win the competition, her performance captivated audiences everywhere. At the age of 12, her uncle Barry Hankerson's record company would sign a distribution deal with Jive Records, and he'd immediately sign his niece, determined to make the young vocalist a star. And it was through this deal that he would introduce her to Jive Records' latest multi-talented artist and producer, R. Kelly. Notably, Aaliyah would be introduced to Robert when she was just 14 years old, which you will come to find out is his age preference. Aaliyah was extremely talented, and while this video will only touch on her relationship with the Predator, I will leave links to other documentaries covering her life and tragic death in the description box down below. When she was introduced to Robert, she was a tomboy. She wore glasses, had braces, and dressed like the average 14-year-old kid. In other words, she looked young. But Robert advised her and her uncle that if they were going to sell her as a successful R&B singer, she needed to take on a much older, more adult image. Robert would have the women that he was constantly surrounded by take Aaliyah under their wing and give her advice on how to style herself and her hair, but they made sure that this advice was always given with a gentle hand. Most of the changes to her appearance were done to make her look older, more sexual, but they would frame these changes as things that she had wanted to do herself. According to those close to both Kelly and the young artist, from the moment Robert met her, she became his next target. Tiffany Hawkins was still under Robert's thumb, with him repeatedly sexually abusing her, keeping her isolated, and promising her career advancement as long as she did the things that he asked. She was living with the music mogul, and he eventually allowed her to record background vocals for Aaliyah's debut album, titled Age Ain't Nothing But a Number. The album's name came from the title track, where the 14-year-old sings about how there is nothing wrong with a teenager having a sexual relationship with an older lover. The song was of course written by R. Kelly and describes the teen in this instance as being the sexually dominant one, declaring that they want to go all the way with their paramour and how the other party is holding them back. You know, because they're committing a crime. The lyrical content of the song is excusing a sexually exploitative relationship in which a child believes that they are giving their consent to an adult when that is not possible. It should be noted that neither Aaliyah, Tiffany, or any of the other girls who Kelly had brought back to his studio and sexually exploited could have consented. No matter if you believe that they went there of their own free will and wanted something from the singer, they were not in a position to knowingly agree to have sex with him due to their age. Every person we have spoken about thus far was actively unable to conceptualize what was happening. They lacked the ability to understand that he was using them for sexual fulfillment and using his power and social status to woo them. Usually, these predators will spur on the relationship, giving the teenager romantic gifts and make sexual advancements, only to pull back, so that they can state that they were the one being pursued. Like the song, they will say it was the child who wanted their romantic attention, and they were borderline powerless to stop them. In cases of sexual grooming, where an adult gives specialized attention to a minor in order to consummate their relationship when it becomes legal, they will repeat that they waited, that their relationship was strictly platonic up until that point, and while that it's legally not actionable, it's still predatory. In the run-up and promotion for the album, Aaliyah would frequently be interviewed with Kelly, and their relationship was widely put on display. They showed up to some interviews wearing matching clothes, were constantly seated next to each other, and the grown man would make suggestive, romantic comments towards the teenager. When asked if they were together, the pair would dance around the subject, saying that they were just best friends and soulmates, but it was clear that there was something there. Aaliyah would praise the singer and producer, saying that he was an amazing person and that she loved working with him because he always made time for her. She would describe things that they would do together, which sounded like dates, but when asked directly, she would neither confirm or deny rumors. Tiffany Hawkins, Javante Cunningham, a former backup dancer, and another unidentified backup dancer would confirm that the relationship between Kelly and Aaliyah was sexual in nature, with all of them citing separate occasions where they witnessed the 27-year-old sexually assault the minor. Javante had also been groomed by Kelly, with him taking her under his wing and employing her as a dancer. The unidentified dancer was similarly groomed, with Kelly scouting her at the age of 14. He told her that he had plans for her and 3 other girls to form an R&B group, and had each of the girls come to his home so he could properly train them. It was then that he began to sexually abuse all of them. She would go on to work as a backup dancer for him and Aaliyah, and she recalled walking in on him sexually assaulting the famous 14-year-old. The amount of 14 to 16-year-olds that were around the producer was notable, but no one made mention of it. While there were rumors that he and Aaliyah were together, no one knew the full scope of what he was doing, and those who did were dissuaded from coming forward. It should also be noted that Aaliyah's mother has denied these claims, stating that she protected her daughter and ensured nothing ever happened to her. She stated that she was always with her daughter, even when she was touring, and Kelly never had the chance to be alone with her. However, we know that that isn't true. In 1994, the pair would get married. Many people deny that this marriage ever took place, and will ignore the evidence. But according to a marriage license that was obtained when she was 15 and he was 27, they would get married at the Sheraton Gateway Suites in Rosemont, Illinois. Allegedly, Aaliyah had become pregnant with Robert's child, and they quickly wed so the baby would not be born out of wedlock. Kelly's tour manager at the time, Demetrius Smith Sr., would confirm the story in 2011, stating that he had helped Aaliyah forge documents in order to show that she was 18, even though she was 3 years younger. Shortly after the marriage was finalized, Vibe magazine published the marriage certificate from the state. Tiffany Hawkins' reaction to the marriage was not what you would expect. She would recall finding out that Robert had married the 15-year-old, and stated, "When I found out that Robert and Aaliyah had gotten married, I didn't care. It didn't bother me because someone else was sleeping with him. That was great because that meant I didn't have to." Shortly after the marriage was publicized, Aaliyah's parents were able to annul the union in the court system, citing that the documents used to confirm her age were fakes, and that she had been too young to consent. However, publicly, both Aaliyah and Kelly denied that they had ever been married, stating that Vibe had published false documents, and that the media was just speculating on a perfectly innocent relationship. Later on, while in court, Robert would admit that he had married the child, but that he didn't know her age and was therefore blameless in the whole ordeal. His lawyer would do interviews adamantly denying that his client had been made aware of her age at all.
Does he deny ever having a sexual relationship with someone who was under the age of consent?
Yes. He absolutely does.
Was he married to Aaliyah when she was 15?
He was married to her when she was 15. Elvis was married to Priscilla.
But so then 15 is not of the age of legal consent, right? I mean...
Right, except that my understanding is that she did not claim to be 15. And in order to get married, she had to lie about her age.
And he is saying that he had no idea.
No idea.
He insisted that the people around her had directly lied to the producer, and that he was just as shocked as everyone else was when he learned the truth. However, this cannot be the case, as there are multiple interviews where Robert spoke about how young Aaliyah was when he began working with her.
Right now, I'm producing a very talented young lady. She's 14, Aaliyah.
Despite headlines circulating surrounding his marriage to a teenager, 1995 would be his biggest year yet. He would obtain his first Grammy nominations for his work on Michael Jackson's hit song, You Are Not Alone, and would end up taking home 3 Grammys during the ceremony. He also dropped his sophomore album, titled simply R. Kelly, which outperformed the first. He had been caught marrying a child, and his career only excelled. His predatory antics only continued, with him routinely picking up other teens by going to malls and parks while on tour. Like before, he would have his entourage around him, and he would see a young girl that he wanted to sexually assault, and he would get one of his men to approach her, telling her that the famous R. Kelly was interested in her. She would think that her world was about to change, that this powerful celebrity was going to use his influence to make her a star, and help make her dreams come true, thus changing her life forever. And he would, only for the worse. That same year, Tiffany would become pregnant with Robert's child. She was 20 years old at that point and had been living with the singer for nearly 5 years. When she told Robert that they were expecting, he denied that he was the father, accusing her of having multiple sexual partners. And when she said she would take a paternity test, he refused. The young woman would attempt to take her life while pregnant and would be hospitalized in the aftermath. Following her hospital stay, she would seek legal counsel, as the situation she had been in was not only unhealthy, but predatory. She realized what she had done, how she brought other girls into Robert's life, and that she had been victimized by him for years. She went to the police with her claims, and provided them with a witness list filled with hundreds of people who had witnessed her abuse, and the abuse of other teenage girls at Kelly's hands. But the state opted not to move forward with the case. Much like in the case of Ian Watkins, they seemed to feel as if she was a scorned lover, someone whose allegations against the singer should not be believed outright. It's unknown if they even looked into her claims, or talked to any of the witnesses that they had been informed of, but it's unlikely that occurred. Kelly was aware of the claims that Tiffany planned to make against him, and while he planned to deny any wrongdoing, seemed to realize that his reputation for being hypersexual could be used against him. Not to mention in the years prior, he had married a child, so in an attempt to discredit the allegations that would be made against him, he would marry the dancer, Andrea Lee. Drea had worked as a backup dancer for the singer-songwriter, and was one of the only dancers who was over the age of consent when she was hired. She was extremely talented, working her way up from backup dancer to choreographer in a matter of years. While touring with him, she hadn't seen him be abusive or break any laws, but she also kept to herself, often taking time on tour to read her Bible and pray. She was one of the only adults there after all, but but she had witnessed his controlling side. Drea and Robert would state that they had been dating for 2 years prior to their marriage in 1996. Drea would tell ABC News in 2018 that Robert kept her purposely isolated and away from his antics, telling her that she reminded him of his mother. Kelly had proposed in February, and in a matter of weeks, he would surprise Andrea with a lavish wedding, which she had no part in planning. Her friends and family had not been invited. The wedding was said to have been gorgeous, with the man sparing no expense, but she had no part in the planning, and didn't even know it was happening until the day of. Tiffany would file a civil suit against the famed singer for assault and battery, and claimed that the labels he had worked for, Zomba, Jive, and Background, were responsible due to gross negligence. However, this court filing would fly under the radar somewhat, as a month prior to her lawsuit, he would release one of his most famous songs, I Believe I Can Fly. Drea would describe the immense change this song had on his career. R. Kelly had been famous for years at that point, but he was primarily popular within the black community. But with the song's inclusion in the Space Jam movie, he was reaching wider audiences, and his celebrity skyrocketed to worldwide. Those who were made aware of the claims dismissed them, believing that Hawkins was a jaded ex who had wanted Kelly for herself, or worse, wanted his money. They felt that her timing was suspicious, given his newfound celebrity in his marriage. It's not difficult to find comments disparaging her, blaming her for what occurred, while also somewhat stating that nothing happened. The other girls who had been sexually assaulted by Kelly no doubt saw the public's reaction to Hawkins' lawsuit, and realized that if they were to come forward, they would get the same treatment. It didn't matter that he had married a 15-year-old, or that he had sexually abused them in front of other people, or that they had witness lists and evidence. As long as he was considered the king of R&B and an industry icon, they were never going to be believed. Following Aaliyah's initial album cycle in 1997, she would leave Jive Records and sign with Atlantic. She filed suit to have all records of her marriage with Kelly expunged, and admitted in her court filings to have lied about her age. She also cut all professional and personal ties with the producer, but never spoke about the relationship, choosing instead to move forward with her career. However, her career was hindered a bit by Kelly, as he spoke ill of her to other producers, and attempted to blacklist her. In a 2014 interview that was memorialized on Billboard.com, in which they talk about the marriage and the relationship, but only call the union sketchy instead of illegal, her cousin would talk about how she was villainized for leaving the pedophile. He said, quote, "That's what made the transition to the second album difficult. We were coming off of a multi-platinum debut album, and except for a couple of relationships with Jermaine Dupri and Puffy, it was hard for us to get producers on the album," meaning that she went from working with one pedophile, R. Kelly, to another alleged pedophile, Sean Combs. With the majority of the public either unaware of the charges against him or firmly on his side, he felt untouchable. Men who would work alongside the singer-songwriter would describe going into his studio and seeing multiple young girls in each room, just milling about. There were rooms where 3 or more girls would just hang out, some with beds, some without, and it was well established that Kelly would disappear into these spaces for some time. When Kelly wasn't in the room, these girls would have to face the walls, and were not allowed to talk to anyone outside of Robert. They were told that they had to refer to the musician by calling him Daddy, and weren't allowed to do anything without asking his permission. This included drinking water, going to the bathroom, and eating, and at times, Kelly would deny these young girls from these basic necessities simply because he felt like it. Multiple victims would recall needing to go to the bathroom for hours, repeatedly asking him if they could relieve themselves, and him telling them no, simply because he could. If they had an accident or tried to relieve themselves anyway, he would punish them physically by assaulting them, usually in front of the other girls, as a sort of warning. Many of these men would claim ignorance, that they never directly asked these girls their ages, or checked IDs, and that they didn't really know what happened behind closed doors. But it was clear that once more, because Kelly was making the record companies money, they turned a blind eye. The people around R. Kelly were directly profiting off of him, so they didn't care if a few teenagers were sexually abused around them. This was also true in how he treated Drea. Despite the fact that he kept his more depraved behavior away from his wife, when she became pregnant, she saw a notable shift in how he acted. He isolated her, forcing her to stay in certain rooms when guests were over, and forcing her to ask him permission to eat. If she made a mistake, like not cooking his food in the exact way that he wanted, he would lash out at her, telling her that she had ruined his meal and was purposely trying to sabotage him. In 1998, after winning 3 Grammys, Kelly would settle his lawsuit with Hawkins after she gave a nearly 8-hour deposition, during which she recalled multiple instances of abuse, where Kelly was placed in control of every aspect of her life, and she was made into his sexual slave. She included names of all the people who had witnessed what had occurred, as well as dates, and recalled moments with such clarity, Kelly's lawyers encouraged him to settle the suit. While maintaining that he had done nothing wrong, Hawkins was offered a settlement of $250,000, as long as she signed a non-disclosure agreement, which she took. Unfortunately, this instance seemed to relay one thing to the musician, that being that if he couldn't silence his victims with power, he could silence them with money and an NDA. But like he had when he wrote, produced, and got his child bride to sing Age Ain't Nothing But a Number, Kelly began to throw his crimes in the public's face, calling himself the Pied Piper of R&B. In an interview with GQ in 2016, he would claim that he didn't know the history of the Pied Piper, and only gave himself that nickname because he began including flutes into his music. The following is an excerpt of that interview. "But I say, do you understand why people thought that was strange?" "Absolutely not," he replies. "I was just thinking about the flute, you know?" But I continue, "You know the story of the Pied Piper." He shakes his head. "I don't really know the story of the Pied Piper. I don't read stories, first of all. I just remember either a rabbit or a rat leading people out of the village with a flute." And he laughs at the thought. "That's all I can tell you." So now I have the surreal experience of explaining to someone who has been calling himself the Pied Piper of R&B for over a decade, through a parade of underage sex accusations, the fable of the Pied Piper, as it's one of the most often told, and as I know it, how the Pied Piper was hired by the people of Hamelin to lure away all the town's rats with his music, and then, when he did so and the adults of Hamelin refused to pay him, how the Pied Piper took revenge by luring away all of the children and killing them. Kelly seems sufficiently mystified that I genuinely believe he doesn't know any of this. First, he asks for a recap. He led the, what, he says? Children out of the town and killed them, I repeat, because they didn't pay? Yes. I offer another summary. The Pied Piper, I explain, is a kind of bad guy who does terrible things to young people. Because they didn't pay him, he repeats, as though he's still digesting the narrative. Oh wow, I never knew that. I never ran into no story like that. Yeah, that's because R. Kelly can't even read. So maybe he didn't know that he was aligning with a folklore that is frequently used to describe pedophiles, or he could be lying. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. He would continue his musical domination for years, releasing his album R in 1998 and TP2.com in 2000 to massive commercial success. But in the new millennium, things would begin to change for Kelly, although it would take nearly 2 more decades for anything concrete to take place. In 2001, Kelly would come under fire again when a former intern at Epic Records would sue him, accusing him of forcing her into an accidental sexual relationship when she was just 16. The lawsuit claimed that she had met the singer in 1999 while working as an intern, and then he repeatedly made romantic advances towards her. She would tell NBC News in 2019 that he had asked to kiss her one day at work, and when she rebuffed his advance, he asked if he could simply hug her instead. She relented, but when Robert hugged the girl, he began to kiss her anyways. She would say, quote, "I just didn't know what to do. Like, I don't know if this was normal. I didn't know if this is how adults acted," which is similar to what Tiffany thought when she saw him in bed with the other teenage girls. When she turned 18, she realized what had occurred, and she ended their sexual relationship and filed her lawsuit, claiming that he had sexually and physically abused her over the years. Robert denied these claims, and once more, when people became aware of the accusations, felt that she was just another woman falsely accusing him in order to extort him. They used the same general talking points that they had with Tiffany, repeatedly stating that Robert was a successful, wealthy married man. They doubted that the instances of abuse actually happened, but also said that if they did occur, she probably likely wanted it. And once more, any other woman who had been hurt by the singer-songwriter saw the public's reaction and felt discouraged to come forward with their own claims. The suit would eventually be settled, with Tracy being paid $250,000, but not signing an NDA as far as we were able to find. But this was just the beginning of the end. In 2002, during the Olympic opening ceremony in Salt Lake City, the Chicago Sun-Times published an article stating that one of their reporters, Jim DeRogatis, had been sent a tape that showed R. Kelly having sex with a 14-year-old girl and then peeing on her. According to court records, at the beginning of the video, R. Kelly was seen handing the girl money, and it would later be revealed that he had hoped that if the tape were to get out, that people would believe that the child was a prostitute, which would mean that she was probably an adult, or at least that he was of reasonable belief that she was an adult. Jim had been sent anonymous information on R. Kelly before, with someone sending him information about the sex abuse allegations against the singer for years. Even though he had published credible claims, nothing ever seemed to come of it. As mentioned, many people wrote off the claims outright, believing that any person who had ever had sex with R. Kelly must have been a willing participant, because he was a celebrity. The reporter immediately handed the evidence over to the police and was forthright about where he had gotten them. He told them everything he knew, which wasn't much, but he knew that he'd been given evidence of a crime, and that he couldn't just sit there and do nothing. Kelly would deny the claims outright, stating repeatedly that he was not the person seen in the video. Meanwhile, his defense team stated that the girl seen on the tape was not underage. So, if you're following along, he wasn't the man on the tapes, but even if he was, she was legally of age, so it wasn't a crime. As reports began to swirl about the sex tape, multiple outlets finally gave credence to the other sexual abuse lawsuits that had been following him for years. However, the public's response to the tape was not what you would expect. Instead of shock, horror, and disgust, the tape was being sold everywhere. Despite the video showing what amounts to child sexual abuse material, everyone seemed to want one, and they became a hot-ticket item. Other tapes of R. Kelly were also distributed, some featuring other adults, but all of the tapes were filmed illegally, usually without the consent or knowledge of the woman involved. People wanted to see the evidence of what he had done. They wanted to determine for themselves if the girl was actually a child, and if the man was actually R. Kelly. And on some online forums, I found people talking about having watch parties for the tapes, as if it was a highly anticipated new movie. After the tape was turned over to the police in February of 2022, they began their investigation into Kelly in earnest. All of those times they had been approached by his victims, like Tiffany Hawkins, and declined to press charges or look at the evidence, was now coming back to bite them, but they were finally taking his crimes seriously. While the case against Kelly was being investigated, 2 more women would file suit against the singer, each believing that with the public case against him being taken seriously, that they could finally come forward and be believed. Patrice Jones alleged that she had met and had sex with Robert when she was just 16 years old at Chicago Track's studio in 1999. She went further to state that they would continue to have sex for upwards of 3 times per week between January and August of that year. But when she became pregnant in June, he coerced her to have an abortion. One of R. Kelly's employees would accompany the minor to the family planning associates. They provided direct evidence to the court, including medical records confirming the procedure, which the star had paid for. Montina Woods would also file suit against Robert, as he had filmed them having sex without her consent, and that video had been sold. Thankfully, she was not a child when the video was made. It would take 4 months for the singer to be arrested and indicted in Chicago on 21 counts of child pornography. However, with the police indictment, they also had to announce that any person who had purchased the tape was in possession of child pornography and was committing a crime, but that did little to hamper the public. Immediately following Kelly's arrest, he posted the $750,000 bail and did an interview with MTV, denying the allegations against him. At time of recording, we've not been able to locate that interview, and many of our sources have been made unavailable, as the web archive was hit with a cyber attack. We often use the Internet Archive for our research, and especially use its library section. And if the archive is not back online by the time of the upload, most of our sources will either be linked to dead articles or not be present at all. However, we were able to find an upload of an interview done with Kelly that was done on The Ed Gordon Show. This re-upload comes from the page Saving R, which is, as you might have guessed, a fan page dedicated to defending R. Kelly's legacy, as well as disparaging his victims and labeling that all claims against him as being false, or in some cases unimportant, given what he has done for the community at large. According to comments on the post, there is a second portion of the interview that has been cut out, and we have yet to find any record of it. As this is one of the first recorded interviews we were able to find involving R. Kelly and his sexual crimes, we will be analyzing it. The audio is a bit spotty during the interview portion. Though we have tried to get a better quality upload or enhance the audio ourselves, this is the best we could do.
I sat down with the singer this morning in Atlanta, where he's working on new music.
Clearly a difficult time for you now. How are you holding up?
It's very difficult, but I'm holding my own, you know. Got a lot of support from a lot of people out there praying for me, so, you know, I feel pretty good.
Let's talk about why you decided to talk now.
I've been wanting to talk ever since I heard about all of this, but unfortunately you got to go get lawyers, you know what I'm saying, and get protected because of the fact that I'm famous, and there's just a lot of people coming at me right now. So as soon as I went to the lawyers, of course, they tell you to shut up, you know, you can't say this, you can't say that. And that's one thing I really wanted people to understand, that I've been wanting to say something. I've been wanting to come out and, you know, and say what I had to say. But unfortunately, when you are me, and, you know, or famous, they tell you can't say nothing. So I had to pound them over the head and tell them that, you know, it's enough is enough. You know, people coming out of the woodwork now. I gotta come out and say something. So even though one hand is behind my back, but I'm here.
How R. Kelly speaks about himself and these accusations is interesting, because he repeatedly sets himself apart from anyone who is watching him. He's famous, he's not like other people, he is better than the average person, and therefore accusations like this are normal. By setting himself so far apart and above the viewing public, he is able to dictate his own false reality. Sure, you've likely never been repeatedly falsely accused of child sexual abuse and sexual assault by the people you had a working relationship with, and you've never had the police say that they found 21 counts worth of child pornography in your possession, and that's just because you aren't a celebrity. If you were as successful as he was, you would know that this is incredibly normal, but that's not as common as R. Kelly is trying to convince you it is. Though there are plenty of celebrities, singers, and actors who have committed crimes as depraved as Robert, to try and frame this as normal is simply false. Mind you, at this point, he isn't just being accused of child sexual abuse, or sexual assault and the like. He's being charged with it, meaning that investigating parties found enough evidence against him to take him to court. Even in Robert's delusion, if being accused of crimes is normal, being charged with them is distinctly abnormal. Moreover, Kelly ends his statement by saying that he had smacked his attorneys over the head so he could do this interview and maintain his innocence, as if the lawyers were idiots for not allowing him to talk. But that's far from the case. Him doing this interview is an admittedly bad idea, because everything he says from this point onwards can be held against him in court. If he lies about anything, contradicts any previous statements given to the police or to the public, the prosecution will jump on that. This interview, and all the other interviews where he talks about the accusations against him, will only damn him in the eyes of the law. Moreover, he's simply not an intelligent man. He's responsible for some good music, sure, but when his actions are analyzed, his attempts to obfuscate the truth are obvious. He's not a good liar or manipulator. He was just powerful enough to silence any criticism and get away with his crimes. His defense attorneys likely told him to stay quiet, that they would release a statement on his behalf, denying that he had anything to do with the crimes that he's been accused of. They would use purposeful language in order to dictate to the public what they should feel about his accusers, and then fight the matter in court. Lawyers, especially high-powered defense attorneys, are fantastic at what they do. They know how to get the public on their side without jeopardizing their case, and they are extremely deliberate in their actions. Unlike Robert, R. Kelly is an extremely emotional man who has a habit of lashing out and saying things that will only make him look worse in the long run. But because he was sheltered by the record labels and those who benefited from his career, he's never had to face any consequences, which he seems to take to mean that he is somewhat of a mastermind. But that is far from the case. If you've watched our coverage of Phil Spector, they are incredibly similar. As we mentioned, while working with the producer, Robert would often throw temper tantrums when his direction wasn't immediately followed. And to be fair, it probably should have. But we're not dealing with an R&B song right now. He seems to believe that in all cases, he knows best, and that's why he's doing this interview.
You and I talked about a month and a half ago, 2 months ago, right before the tape came out, and I asked you about the rumors at that point. There was no alleged tape. And you said you'd been dealing with those rumors for a long time, and somehow you'd learned to live with that in one instance. Was it the fact now that there is a purported tape that you said, okay, I don't care, I gotta come out now? Was it the tape that put you over the top?
This did it for me. That, and then also the long caboose of the trains that comes along with it, people coming out of Woodworth saying this, that, and yada, 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 yada about me. And just the rumor of it all, you know, it made me say, I gotta come out and I gotta say something.
Are you, and I know you all have drawn the wagons and you keep your camp close, but are you aware of how many people believe you to be guilty now?
I've heard a lot of people that said a lot of things as far as I'm concerned, as far as the tape is concerned, as far as a lot of rumors. But right now I can't really deal with that because I got to deal with, you know, showing people that I'm not guilty. I got to deal with dealing with the fact that I got a life and I got to protect that life.
You also have a family.
Yeah.
How are they dealing with this? You have 2 children.
Yeah.
And a wife.
Yeah. And
how are they dealing with this?
Well, my wife is totally behind me because she knows the truth, and she's in my corner. And my kids are too young right now to really know what's going on, but I'm sure when they grow up, they'll know the truth.
This, unfortunately, is a very true statement. Drea has described in interviews how initially she didn't believe the accusations that had been leveled at her husband because he had isolated her so much. When she toured with him, she was kept away from the young girls and given her own separate room. She was given so much responsibility as a choreographer and principal dancer that she didn't see the crimes that were occurring around her. When they were married, she was isolated even further and forced to live away from the rest of the world, completely under her husband's thumb. Meanwhile, in recent interviews, his kids have stated that they want nothing to do with their father, and at the time of writing, his daughter would accuse him of molestation and sexual abuse. So he's right. His kids do know the truth.
How much do you think about them when you look at this situation?
I think about them maybe 1,000,000% more now than I was thinking about them before, which was billions of percents, you know, as far as thinking about my kids. And the reason why is because all of this is, it has brought me to a conclusion, you know, as far as, you know, trying to make a change in my life and just trying to turn this whole thing around. And, you know, as far as myself is concerned, and really notice how important my kids are, how important my family is.
We didn't touch on this earlier, but every time Robert was made aware of his victims speaking out against him, he would make some kind of statement like this. In 1996, after Tiffany Hawkins came forward, Robert would allude to the accusations while on stage, stating that the way he had been living his life had been wrong, and he had found the Lord. The implication of this being that he was such a wild partier that he was living in sin, but in the time that had passed since, he had changed his ways and was an entirely different person. This statement doesn't admit guilt outright, but it does imply in a way that any lawyer would advise against. Saying something like this is odd when you are adamant that you are innocent of all wrongdoing, which is his position. If you haven't done anything wrong, if the accusations against you are all being made by women that you either worked with or rejected, or by strangers you don't know, why would that make you change your ways? If you've lived a life where family is the most important thing to you, why would you want to change that?
Are 2 lawsuits that you settled alleged by 2 young ladies who, at the point in time that the lawsuits were filed, were adults, but when they alleged that you had a relationship with them, they said they were minors. You settled out of court.
Yeah.
In this country, many people will assume that means you were guilty. Why'd you settle?
Well, I know that, and now I know that. But at the time, I really wasn't thinking about that. All I know is my lawyers, when it came to me, my lawyers would tell me, you know, at that time, I had a lot of good things in my life going on musically and with my career. You know, this is just not a good time to go to court over something like that. So if you settle, it'd be better. And right now, I wish that I hadn't done that, because I think that has a lot to do with the rumor of R. Kelly and the whole image of the young girl thing and this, that, and the other. And but if I had it all to do it over again, I definitely wouldn't settle.
Did you?
This is an objectively stupid thing to say, but it might not be dishonest. As we covered, each of the women who made their accusations against him public had evidence against him. They had worked with him for years. They were seen by him and his associates, and there were records of them meeting with him. They had names, dates, locations, and more. Though many of the people who had witnessed his crimes worked directly with him and would benefit from his continued freedom, there were some that could easily turn on him and tell the truth. Tiffany's nearly 8-hour deposition was so thorough that his lawyers believed that if they were to go to trial, her defense could subpoena the hundreds of witnesses that she named. And unless they committed extreme witness tampering, it was likely that one or more of their witnesses would admit to what they have seen. Fighting these allegations in court would have been horrible for the singer, but it doesn't seem like he knows that. He feels justified in what he did, and why wouldn't he? He was idolized for years, told that he was the king of R&B, and the king of pop, soul, and more. So why would he expect the court case to not go in his favor? This is now the second time that the singer has alluded to his defense attorneys acting on his behalf, in a way that he disagrees with, and implying that had he been allowed to be in charge of the cases from the beginning, he would be in a much better position, which is objectively not true.
Have any kind of relationship with those 2 girls?
Absolutely not.
You did know them, though?
Yeah, I know them.
Did you have a professional relationship with them?
No.
You had no professional relationship with them? And you had no personal relationship with them?
No.
In terms of contact, you did have contact with them, correct?
So this is an incredibly stupid thing to say, because it begs the question, then how did you know them? Robert agrees that he knew the women who had filed suits against him, but when asked if he had a personal or professional relationship with them, he says no, firmly denying that he had any sort of relationship with them at all. So he knew them, but not enough to say that he had any sort of relationship, even a platonic or personal one. These 2 statements contradict each other, obviously so, and the interviewer is about to call that out. So let's see how Kelly gets out of this one.
You would see them. Explain it to me.
Well, the situation is, by me settling out of court in settling that situation. Like I said earlier in the interview, I had one hand behind my back. I really can't go into detail about that particular thing because when I filed the lawsuit, of course, I signed a piece of paper saying I couldn't discuss those.
So there's a
particular people in that
confidentiality
situation.
agreement
Exactly.
after the fact.
Exactly.
He didn't sign anything like that, obviously, as he is currently talking about the cases now, on television. But it's a fairly easy get-out-of-jail-free card, because the majority of people have not had to settle lawsuits, nor have they had to sign a confidentiality agreement, so this could be believable. However, if you think about what he said, even for just a moment, it doesn't make sense. So he knew the two women who had previously filed suit against him for sexual abuse, when they were minors, but not personally or professionally. He knew them in a nebulous way, yet their accusations were so worrisome that his lawyers, who had stated that there was no case against his client, told him to settle out of court, which he did. If he didn't know these women, if there was no evidence against him, he could have easily fought the accusations. Unlike his two accusers, he was making millions of dollars from his songs. He could afford to drag the lawsuit out for as long as he wanted, bankrupting his victims and using the best lawyers that money could buy. If he could prove in court that they were lying, his lawyers would have gladly done so, but that wasn't the case. R. Kelly expects the public to believe that he settled the lawsuit with two people he barely knew, simply because it was easier.
You are saying there was no professional relationship, though, with either one of them, correct? And that there was no personal relationship with either one of them.
What I said is I knew them.
But you did know them.
I knew them.
Aaliyah, that was an issue that a lot of people came to both of you at the time, 94, and wondered. The rumor was that you had married her. We know she's gone now. We know that she can't defend herself, but records have been brought up. A marriage license and an annulment paper.
No disrespect here, Gordon, but Aaliyah's gone, and I have a lot of respect for Aaliyah and her parents. I will definitely not be even discussing Aaliyah. I will not do it. Because
and I would not
Aaliyah
ask
has nothing to do with this, and I just,
but Robert,
out of respect for her mom and her father, I definitely will not.
And again, if you choose not to, I understand. I don't want you to talk about Aaliyah as much as I want to clear up the situation.
Well, but by her not having anything to do with the situation, I would hope that people and my fans and everybody will understand why it is I definitely couldn't get into talking about it.
So is it fair to say, though, that the legal documents that have been shown are real?
I really don't think it's fair to say anything dealing with Aaliyah, because I just don't think that Aaliyah, deserves that. I wouldn't want to bring her up right now.
The documents were real. They were married when she was just 15, and Kelly had had a sexual relationship with her. Unfortunately, there's a prevalent narrative that if that fact at all is acknowledged, it's disrespectful towards her memory. But her memory isn't served by lying about that. The only person who benefits from that lie is Robert, the man who sexually abused her. She in no way benefits from people ignoring what happened, because she is not at fault for what happened. No victim should experience shame for having been preyed upon, because it wasn't their fault. This is a tactic that predators use to keep their victims silent, and it has worked. If a predator can convince a victim that they should stay silent out of self-preservation, that by coming forward about what they went through, they are hurting their careers and public image, then they ensure their own safety. And with so many people repeating that in regards to what happened to Aaliyah, they allow Robert to twist the narrative. Now he isn't avoiding the question because he's guilty, and can't explain away the legal documents that show he married her when she was 15, and that he was well aware of her age prior to that. Of course, he's simply doing this to preserve her legacy. He looks like a good guy for avoiding the question, instead of looking like a predator ignoring his crimes.
Let's talk about the tape. When I talked to your representatives, they said you had not seen it and don't want to see it. Is that true?
That is absolutely true.
Have you ever made tapes?
Well, I've done a lot
sex tapes.
I've done a lot of things in my life, man, and things that I even regret, man, and I'm even getting, I feel like I need help for that, and I'm getting help for that. Things that I've done in my life that I don't, really care to discuss here. I can't give you a whole list of my sins and the whole thing, but I've done a lot of things in my life that I'm trying to get help for. And that's why, I consulting with Meeks, Reverend Meeks right now, and just trying to get, some understanding to what's going on in my life.
In response to the question of if he had ever made sex tapes, which was asked in such a general way as to not imply that the tape in question is his own, he says that he has done a lot of things, which is essentially a non-answer. He continues by talking about how he has done a lot of things that he isn't exactly proud of, that he is working on his faith and working with a reverend to change those things. But he ends the statement by saying that he's trying to gain some understanding of what's going on in his life, as if he is not the person in charge of those actions. It's all essentially nonsense, and the reporter's reaction as he gives his answer is telling.
But that being said, those things that you've done wrong, did that include making tapes while having sex? I'm not talking about with minors now. I'm just talking about period.
Well, like I say, I don't want to sit here and give you everything I've done wrong. You know, a list of things, a list of my sins.
Robert, I want to help. I want somehow when people leave to be able to say, I can make some conclusions, because that's what it's about, unfortunately, for us now. I guess what I'm trying to get at is, if you have made them in the past, how can you say, as you are alleging, that it's not you on this tape if you've not seen it? That's my question.
Well, if I've never done anything like that, and this particular tape is supposed to be being a tape with me and a young girl, I've done a lot of wrong things in my life, but I am not a criminal. I'm not a monster that people are saying I am. And if people out there have a tape of me and they're saying it's with me and a young girl, a minor, then they're sadly mistaken or they're lying.
Though he kind of dances around the answer for a bit, this is a simple and effective denial. Simply saying that you know it's not you on the tape because you've never committed that sort of crime is an excellent answer, one his lawyers no doubt coached him on prior to the interview.
I chose not to watch that tape on a personal level until we agreed to do this. And I watched it yesterday. There are people who will say, if it's not him, he's got a straight-up twin that he doesn't know about. Do you understand? Because I will say this, I don't know if it was you or not. The person in the tape resembles you a whole lot. Do you understand why people are, if that is the case, this person, if it's not you, resembles you, do you understand why they think that in fact it's you? Body type, face, etc.
No, because I haven't seen the tape, but I've heard that, of course.
Why not look at it and be able to say, that is not me, unequivocally?
This was a strange time, because this reporter just admitted to watching child sexual abuse material on air, but equating it to research. You don't need to watch the tape to know what's on it. There are plenty of court documents and reports about it, but as we mentioned, how the public responded to these accusations was deeply disturbing.
Because I can say it with all confidence right here that it's not me because I didn't do it. You know, it's just if a person tell me, you know, did you rob a bank yesterday? And we have you on tape robbing a bank. If I didn't rob a bank, why would I go to see if I robbed a bank on the tape? That's crazy. I wouldn't do that.
Why do you believe there's so much here? The 2 lawsuits, a third one is being looked at from a young woman who says that you coerced her as a minor to get an abortion. The Aaliyah question.
Now that we're fighting because, well, for one, I know I should have fought those other ones, but I didn't. That's in the past. I can't do anything about that. But now
so you're alleging that that third one is totally false.
It's all, yeah, it's false.
As you say, the other 2 are.
Yeah, because we're fighting that. I can talk about that. You know, I couldn't talk about the other ones, but I wish I could. But this one now, I'm fighting it, and people will see when the smoke clear that all of those were lies.
Robert would end up settling the suit for an undisclosed amount of money. He did not, as he is claiming, fight the suit because he was innocent and wanted to prove that in a court of law. He proved nothing, and resolved the case like he resolved every other one.
Here and nowadays, you can't believe everything you see. It's a lot of ways to doctor a tape. There's a lot of ways to make things look like what they're not. Now, I haven't seen this tape, and I'm not interested in seeing this tape, but I know that, you know, like I said earlier, I got a lot of problems in my life. I've dealt with I'm dealing with a lot of things within myself. I'm not this perfect guy. I'm not sitting here saying that. I'm not an angel, but I'm no criminal.
Sparkle, ex-protege of yours, she says the girl in the tape is her niece and that's you in the tape. What do you say to that?
Absolutely not. It's not. And not only that, from what I hear, what my lawyers tell me, the girl said it's not her. And even her mom and her father said it's not her.
So this is true to an extent. Neither the girl seen on the tape or her parents would cooperate with the investigation. They even went so far as to say that she wasn't the girl on the tape. Her aunt, however, would. Her aunt, known professionally as Sparkle, had worked alongside Robert and had been in a romantic relationship with him. She had introduced her niece to him at a gospel concert for her church, and believed that the producer could make her a star. She routinely brought the girl to the studio, where she worked alongside Kelly, and even asked him to be her godfather, which he agreed to. Shortly thereafter, their relationship turned sexual. Because her aunt had a close working relationship with the singer-songwriter, and he had agreed to become her godfather, her parents testified that they felt comfortable with her spending time alone with Robert, even having overnight visits. At the time the tape had been turned into the police and was publicly sold, the girl was 15 and had not been one to make the abuse public. She was still in the throes of his abuse, believing that he would help her with her career and feeling a warped sense of loyalty to her predator. Overnight, it seemed like the whole world was watching her most intimate moments and judging her for it. Everywhere she looked, there were comments about who she was, how she acted, and if she deserved what happened to her. She would go on to testify in 2022 that she lied about the sex tape for years because she was afraid to expose the singer, terrified for her family's safety and well-being, and that she was deeply ashamed of having taken part in it. It felt safer to say it wasn't her, even though it was a lie. Again, she had not been the one to send the tape to Jam de Regatas or to make the tape public. So the entire ordeal was deeply traumatic for her, but Robert spins this to his advantage. When the tape had been made public, he immediately talked to the victim and her family, and convinced her to stay loyal to him. She was to deny that it was her on the tape, that she had ever had a sexual relationship with him, and parrot his talking points, that being that he was set up. And so she did. Her aunt, however, did not agree to this arrangement. Sparkle felt some kind of responsibility and repeatedly stated that it was her niece on the tape, that she had had a sexual relationship with R. Kelly as well, and that he was a monster. But because the victim herself had not spoken up, Robert and his legal team were able to spin the accusations as being baseless. How could she say anything with such clarity when her own family members, including the victim, said she was wrong? They painted her as a money-hungry, fame-seeking person who had an axe to grind with the singer because he had spurned her advances, and for the most part, the public was on board with this interpretation. I'll leave a link to the upload in the description box down below. However, the audio cuts in and out so much for the rest of the interview that it's basically unusable. But following the interview, he would be charged with another 12 counts of producing child sexual abuse images. The police had searched his holiday home and found multiple digital cameras filled with pictures of Robert having sex with other minors. However, these charges would eventually be dropped after his lawyers argued that the police lacked sufficient cause to search his home. And after 6 years of waiting, the case against the singer would eventually go to trial, where he was found not guilty. The jury's decision came down to 2 points, that being the alleged victim's own statements and a mole that was seen on R. Kelly's back. The prosecution argued that the presence of the mole, one which the public was widely unaware of, was evidence that the man on the tape was the singer. However, Kelly's lawyers produced their own forensic expert, who said that the footage could have been manipulated to frame him, and that it was such poor quality that the mole was likely just a shadow. His lawyers were able to discredit each of the witnesses that the prosecution produced, accusing most of seeking financial gain off of the scandal, and it took the jury less than a day to find him not guilty. But things were far from over. Just a quick edit here, so when we tried to upload this video, either our internet or YouTube or both continued to stop midway through. We tried to upload the entire video as is, but we are likely going to have to break this upload into parts. So if you're watching this video the day it goes up on Patreon, the next video will be posted as soon as possible. If you're watching this video on YouTube, when it's made public, the next video is already available on Patreon, but it will be made accessible tomorrow as a part of Hall Week. I do apologize for any inconvenience. Our internet coverage is remarkably spotty, and while I've tried to improve it over the years, unfortunately, a lot of it has to do with the area that we're located in. But as always, if you've made it to this portion in the video, thank you so much for watching. If you have any critiques or comments, feel free to leave them down below or email me at dreading.official@gmail.com. If you liked the video, be sure to leave a like, and please subscribe if you want to see more content. With all of that said, stay safe, and I will see you tomorrow.